Imagine Superman and Lex Luthor in the same room. Sparks are bound to fly, and that's what happened in Malta yesterday. It's a tiny island nation in southern Europe, normally stays out of news, but yesterday it was the scene of a tense diplomatic face-off. Russia versus Ukraine and the US. I leave you to decide who is Superman and who is Lex Luthor. Anyway, Malta was hosting this meeting, the OSCE meeting, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE. It's a multinational security grouping. It includes nations from Europe, North America, and Asia. Russia is also part of this group. So Malta invited their foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. It was a big moment for Moscow because Malta is also a member of the European Union, and this was Lavrov's first visit to an EU nation since the war in Ukraine, the first in almost 3 years. Last year's OSCE meeting was in North Macedonia, which is not an EU member, and before that it was hosted by Poland, which did not invite Lavrov. But Malta did. As expected, the meeting produced fireworks. Lavrov was seated at the round table with his rival counterparts, Antony Blinken of the US and Andriy Sybiha of Ukraine. Just as Lavrov started to speak, there was a walkout. The delegations from Ukraine, Poland and Estonia left the room. Take a look. That left Blinken and Lavrov. The Russian foreign minister took aim at NATO. He said the alliance needed a new enemy after the disgrace in Afghanistan, hence they were targeting Russia. He also accused NATO of starting a new Cold War. After that, it was Blinken's turn to speak. Though Lavrov did not stick around for that, he left immediately after his speech, something that the US diplomat did highlight.
The US and its allies threw it all away, as well as the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty and Intermediate Range and Shorter Range Missile Treaty. And the question is, what for? The answer to us is obvious. In order to return NATO to the political spotlight. After the Afghan disgrace, there was a need for a new common enemy. And the result is a reincarnation of the Cold War, only now with a much greater risk of it moving into a hot stage.
Now, I regret that our colleague, Mr. Lavrov, has left the room, not giving the courtesy to listen to us as we listen to him. And of course, our Russian colleague is very adept at drowning listeners in a tsunami of misinformation. Let's talk about escalation. Let's talk about the introduction of North Korean forces into Europe. Let's talk about the use of intermediate-range ballistic missiles to attack Ukraine.
A feisty statement from Antony Blinken. But let's be honest here, the scales have firmly tipped in Russia's favor. Blinken is an outgoing Secretary of State. His government tried very hard to isolate Russia. But Moscow is anything but. Just look at Lavrov's engagements in Malta. He met the foreign minister of Slovakia and also the foreign minister of Hungary. Both these countries are members of NATO and the EU. Yet they're talking to Sergei Lavrov of Russia. Plus, Russia knows that Donald Trump is coming to the White House. He has promised to end the war in Ukraine. He's also hinted at cutting off military aid to Kiev. That gives Moscow the upper hand. Vladimir Putin knows how to deal with Donald Trump, how to press the right buttons. We saw an example of that this week. Foreign Minister Lavrov gave an interview to American journalist Tucker Carlson. Now, Carlson is a huge Trump fan. He spoke at Trump rallies during the campaign. His name was also doing the rounds for a cabinet post. In February this year, Carlson interviewed Putin. And now he's spoken to Lavrov. Listen to what the Russian diplomat said about Trump.
What do you think of Donald Trump?
My impression, he's very friendly in, discussions. But this does not mean that that he is pro-Russian, as some people try to present him. The amount of sanctions we received under the Trump administration was very, very, very big.
Lavrov also spoke about Russia's recent military operations, including the ballistic missile attack. He attributed it to Joe Biden's decision last month. The US president allowed Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia, so Lavrov says Russia had to respond.
The United States and the allies of the United States, who also provide these long-range weapons to the Kiev regime, they must understand that we would be ready to use any means not to allow them to succeed in what they call strategic defeat of Russia. So the message which we wanted to sell by testing in real action this hypersonic system is that we will be ready to do anything to defend our legitimate interest.
The last 2 days sum up where things are. When the war broke out, the West was united in opposing it. Russia was locked out of forums like the OSCE. Last year, Lavrov called it an appendage of NATO and the EU. Earlier this year, Russia's parliament passed a resolution against it. OSCE was called anti-Russian and discriminatory. But yesterday, Sergei Lavrov spoke at the same forum. Not only was he invited, he had meetings with other NATO members. It tells you how the pendulum has swung. Western unity is crumbling, Donald Trump will accelerate it, and Putin will be waiting to cash in.